Given the amount of time that we have, I'm not going to read bios. Instead, I'm just going to introduce them by their names and companies. The first person is JIORE Craig. She's awesome. She's the digital practice lead at GREENBERG.
All right, that's a great introduction. I'll take it. All right, so I have some slides, but they're limited in text, and I'll be very engaging, I promise. So we're supposed to talk about social media and polarization. I'm going to start by saying most of you and most people have a good understanding that social media and polarization have a very good relationship. They help each other. And social media platforms, the media that's using social media, journalists, the politicians, the candidates that are using social media as a platform, I would argue that all of those groups, for the most part, are making polarization worse. The good news is that people are actually on social networks and social media, and it is also people, in my opinion, that will be the answer to how we can use social networking and social media platforms in a way that doesn't make polarization a lot worse. So we're political consultants, we're politicians, so I'll focus on one thing that I think a lot of political consultants and campaigns get wrong, and it goes toward making polarization worse, and then I'll keep it short and we can go to questions. So next, I have the control. Okay. So too many campaigns, in my opinion, treat social media as a one-way broadcast situation. This means it's a very top-down approach, pushing out your message, and I'll give you an example. It's a big mistake, and the example I love to use is micro-targeting. Micro-targeting campaigns and campaign consultants love micro-targeting, and they should, and that's why I have an asterisk there, because micro-targeting is smart. Personalized messages going to your voters, telling them what they want to hear, all of it's good. It's a good strategy. But I'm going to argue, and maybe it's a controversial opinion, is that we overly focus on it. And one of the reasons I think we do that is because of consulting culture, but I'll save that for a conversation over drinks. Why do people log into Facebook? Like when you think to yourself, why do they log into Facebook? I don't want you to think, what are they doing on Facebook? They're consuming news, da-da-da-da. That's not why they log in. We heard earlier that their implicit, subconscious motivations is to feel good about themselves. But if you ask someone, so many people these days say, oh, Facebook's so negative, but I stay on it because, I want to see what my kids are doing. I want to see what my family's doing. They log in to talk to people in their own trusted network. They talk to their friends, they want to hear from their families, and that's why they're using the tool. They're there to hear from people they know, talk back, interact. It's a two-way dialogue. Now, the problem with micro-targeting, and the problem with a lot of us, is that they're not there to hear from us. They're not on social media to hear from us. They're on social media to hear from their trusted network. So at the onset, we can tell them what they want to hear. We can meet them where they are. But if they don't want to hear from us, it's kind of a losing battle. And I think that shows when you look at taking social media as more of a social network and less of a media platform. And one reason that I think this really stands out is because think about the media right now, and think about politicians too. I mean, the media, and I said this earlier in a comment, but the media and politicians are some of the most distrusted actors operating in the world right now. Not everywhere. In some places, the numbers actually went up. But this just came out from the Edelman Trust Barometer earlier this year, and it shows trust in institutions, especially media and also politicians, is down. And so you have these people coming onto these platforms and broadcasting their opinion out, but they're not meant to be there, and also people don't want to hear from them, and I actually think them being there and broadcasting like that actually makes people distrust them more, which we can sort of go into and debate why that is. Now, Facebook pretends to understand this. They just came out with all of these suggestions that they're going to make your news feed more filled with things that come from your friends and family. And the idea behind this is right in terms of, yes, they're acknowledging that people use their platform to hear from their friends and family, and they've mucked it up because they've decided we can make a ton of money if we let publishers and brands manipulate this algorithm. But they're trying to get back to basics and go to what it was supposed to be in the beginning, where it was just a network of friends. So they say that they understand this. But I think smart campaigns really understand this too. And I would argue that the people that are using micro-targeting the best and the campaigns that are doing digital the best right now, and unfortunately a lot of them are not people who want to close the divide, but there are some people who are working to combat polarization using these tactics. But those campaigns are using micro-targeting, but they always have a parallel program that is organizing with real humans. They're organizing in a way where they're taking feedback from real humans and listening to it in a two-way engagement direction, and they're listening to what they have to say. And so it makes their micro-targeting not just a top-down, let's just say what they want to hear, but it's a two-way engagement. They're using it as a network. It's a horizontal strategy. So what works? What digital techniques work in the age of polarization? Well, first I want to say that I'm sort of making the claim that a lot of campaigns, a lot of politicians, a lot of elite, a lot of media don't do a good job listening. I was born and raised at a polling firm, so I'll be the first to tell you polls are important because they're one tool we have for listening to the public. Same with focus groups. I also do digital, so I'll also tell you that yes, you can look at the data that you get from micro-targeting and listen to what your ads are telling you. But I'll also tell you that I think it's extremely important to listen in a more meaningful way. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that we have to start using social media not like a TV, not like direct mail, but as a door knock or a chat over coffee, actual two-way engagement. Now, if you do this right, you can buy trust, you can earn trust and buy-in from your voters, which will make them listen to you. So all of your micro-targeting efforts, all the efforts of everything you're putting forward from your messengers will be more valued. To do this in a good way, you should start early. Some of the best programs I've seen, and I primarily work internationally, and now recently I'm working in the US, but the best programs I've seen invest heavily early on in people in local communities that are already trusted, and then they use those people and communities to amplify their message on digital. We should be listening on social media to real conversations. I put this up here because I think it's a great example of how the media gets things wrong. But look at this headline. Social media explodes over the Comey testimony. Okay, well, what does explodes really mean? And then they say reaction on Twitter is swift. Well, who's actually on Twitter? In 2016, it was only 24% of online Americans, so that's not all of social media. And who on Twitter were they talking about? Bots, elites, journalists, politicos who are never changing their vote? We don't know. This headline tells us nothing. So we have to be really careful about how we're listening and interpreting what's happening on social media. Another way we can do this, which is something we do where I work, is looking at the spikes in conversation and really questioning when you see a social media trend of what is that trend? Is it real? Is it fake? How much of it is fake? And this is an example of social media data. No, it's not representative because no, Twitter and the other platforms will never give us all the data because it would not be in their interest to do so. But it's a sample. And so when we see spikes, we're going into those spikes manually. We have tools that we use, but you have to have a human reviewing those decisions, those algorithms that will determine what's a bot and what's fake. And we're parsing that out, and so we can at least understand as fast as possible whether we should take a trend seriously, whether it's actually people feeling a certain way or whether it's a fake, siloed echo chamber conversation that we shouldn't give any attention to. And finally, I want to say that I think one of the reasons we have gotten into a place where people are using social media more as a media channel is because non-digital natives have been decision makers. So non-digital natives are used to a world where TV is the main form of broadcast. They saw social media, they saw a place to put their content, and they put content on those platforms in the same way they put out a TV ad. They focused it on placing ads, targeting ads, as if it was a form of media like TV. But digital natives are growing up. Soon, every campaign member, no matter whether they're the digital person, the speech writer, the press person, they'll all be digital natives. And I hope what that will do is sort of abolish this digital island and create room for digital decisions to be taken in a holistic way. So, I think I finished in a decent amount of time?
Yes.
All right.
Our next speaker is Tom Warwick, who is of KANTO Systems and was formerly the lead of digital for the Brexit campaign.
So I suppose I'll start by saying it's a bit like asking the foxes to look after the chicken coop. We'd obviously never do any of these activities we talk about. So, the first thing is to look out for it, to spot it. What is polarization and how do you find it? It starts very early on in the campaign. Look out for gerrymandering. Look out for every street. We now have the tools to run every street, every house, every neighborhood to work out what is the best boundary line to run. The amount of data we now have on enabling polarization, or more importantly, stopping your opponent using polarization against you, is incredible. Watch out for every domain they register. Campaign consultancies are often lazy. They use the same aliases time and time again. I know most of my opposition's IP addresses. I know their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th alternative registration. We are constantly monitoring what our opponents are doing because they're going to use it against you, and they are going to continually try and register things to hide their activities. A lot of what happens is you'll do some initial advertisements, Facebook, Twitter, or something else like that, to distract, to hide your real intentions. It is incredibly important not to be fooled and not to run into the assumption of knowing what your opposing team is going to be doing. We set up a lot of domain watches and lookups. The other and most important part of spotting it is maintaining democracy after the vote. Time and time again, we have to remember that it isn't last week, last month that polarization occurs, but it happens for the years before an election campaign. So, the basics. Don't lose the narrative. Don't let yourself be labeled as polarizing because your voters aren't mainstream. Transparency of advertisement and dark ads is incredibly important. Your bots, your research networks, your Google AdWords, or whatever other tools you are using may go astray. Be honest with yourself and work out what is happening. But most importantly, work out if you can trick up your opponent's Google advertisements. And if you can, make hay while the sun shines. It is your great opportunity. Call out your opponents at every chance you get and use humor. We saw some fantastically fun videos earlier. I cannot emphasize enough that repeating fake news and calling it fake isn't going to get you very far. Just because you point the finger at someone doesn't mean anyone's going to start to listen at you. You should be spending about 1/3 of your budget on the final 24 hours. I cannot emphasize enough that too often campaigns spend their money early on in the election cycle. If your opponent has time to see what you're doing, they have better opportunity to rebut it. So, how do you stop polarization happening on your side? This is incredibly important, and message discipline matters. You should be able to control every tweet, every activity your own team does. It is important not to be able to be labeled as polarizing. Often you are running experiments that are controversial, that are difficult. Focus group every activity. We often recommend that you should spend about 10% of the budget of any video or Facebook ad or anything else on measuring its effectiveness. Too often we are afraid to actually review what we are doing, and therefore we make the same mistake again and again, and that could lead to accidental polarization. The senior team need to be clear about their message and remit. You are all absolutely responsible for the messages that people hear. I heard too much about it's not our fault if people think we are dog whistling. It's not our fault if people are misinterpreting our message that they are going to go off and do something. We are absolutely responsible for every message that our campaign teams put out, and the ethics that we must all abide by are fundamentally important. There was often a lot of comment in the music industry when people first discovered auto-tune, that magic device that makes you sound at least better than I do. But we lie to ourselves when we listen to that music. It is unacceptable with our leaflets, with our literature, with our Facebook advertisements. On a typical campaign, I might put 100,000 different iterations of a message in a 1 month period. So there is an incredibly difficult balance to strike. My ultimate goal is to work out who to target with what message and by whom. I can give someone a mobile app, they can knock on a door, I can tell them precisely what questions to ask that person to excite them to vote for my team. But we are ultimately responsible for that balance, and that balance is going to become faster and more complicated to analyze as the number of actions we take. So, too often campaigns start right off the gate without even working out the remits of their message. So if I could implore you all to carefully work out what actions you are going to be taking on a campaign, to work out how they can be construed for good and for less good, and to keep a constant vigilance for how best to make sure that you are not inciting the polarization you could be accused of doing. Thank you.
And our final speaker is BESS MAYHEW, former head of digital for the Lib Dems and now of More United.
Thank you. So more or less every Sunday evening, I order a takeaway. It's a little treat for the weekend, get ready for the week ahead. And I get out my phone, get out my app of choice, order something, see what I like, and as soon as I've done that, a little map pops up to tell me where the delivery guy is and how long he's going to take to get there. A few months ago, I was on holiday, and I had booked a place to stay on Airbnb. But the day we arrived, unfortunately, a cyclone was due to arrive at the same time as us, with 150-mile-an-hour winds. And being a millennial and slightly wannabe hipster, instead of booking a normal hotel, I had booked a place to stay in a treehouse on the edge of a cliff, which I thought wouldn't mix very well with a cyclone. So I got out my phone again, I texted the guy who owned the Airbnb. 15 minutes later, he'd cancelled it, given me a refund, and I found somewhere else to stay pretty much instantly. When I got back from holiday, I realised my Kindle was broken. So I logged onto Amazon, up popped a sort of live chat thing, started chatting away, probably with a bot. Couldn't fix it on the live chat, so they offered to call me back within 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, someone called my phone, sorted out the problem straight away. Now, what has this got to do with polarisation? A study I saw last week said that polarisation, or theorised that polarisation was caused by 3 interrelated factors. Firstly, frayed identities, and the sense that your communities are rapidly changing, and you feel like your ties and the traditional things that held you to those communities are deteriorating. Secondly, uncertain and precarious economic futures, the idea that your children are going to do worse than you've done. And thirdly, and most importantly, powerlessness. Now, I would argue that tech has contributed quite a lot to the first two, frayed identities and precarious economic situations. But it should have, and it could have, solved the problem of powerlessness. It just hasn't. Because in almost every other aspect of our lives, whether it's getting a takeaway or booking a hotel, tech has transformed our experience. And we're kind of used to it. We're really used to excellent customer services, businesses responding instantly, live chat, email, phone calls. It's making us feel really, really empowered. But that just isn't the case with politics. Our interaction with politics is probably, and particularly with politicians, probably the same it was 20, 30 years ago. But we have changed, and our politics has changed, and our expectations have changed. Politics is much more issue-based now. People are much happier to say they support a particular issue than to say they support a particular candidate or a particular political party. And people really want to make an impact. They want to have their voice heard, but there's no way for them to do so. Traditionally, if you wanted to get involved in politics, you would join a political party and work your way up the system. But 98.5% of people have chosen not to join a political party here in the UK, and I suspect it's similar in many European countries. But I don't for a second think that those 98.5% of people don't care. It's just that we're not providing them with a way to actually make a difference. So we've got millions of people with their own ideas, their own priorities, and their own beliefs, but no way of being heard. And so it really is little wonder everyone feels so powerless, and that polarisation has reared its ugly head as a result. But what can we do about it, and what can tech do about it? Well, just as in other industries, I believe tech has a massive, massive opportunity to transform the relationship between business and consumer, between politician and voter. It's just that no one has done it yet. As Joy said really eloquently, all this data and micro-targeting and AI and bots is fantastic, but if all we do is find better ways to talk at voters, we're never really going to solve the problem. If you imagine a car manufacturer who has focus groups and the most amazing market research and comes up with a car that's perfectly designed for every single need that you might have, but then you go to the sale room and your customer service experience is really, really terrible, are you still going to buy it? I would argue probably not. So we need to learn from the very, very best of business and the way that they have improved customer service and bring that learning into politics. We need to look at startups like Airbnb, for example, who, when they first started out, listened to every single piece of feedback that anyone gave them and used that to improve their product, to make it work for them. We need to instill at every level of our organisations, whether it's a presidential campaign or a political party or a consultancy, the idea that everyone has the responsibility of listening to voters and making it genuine and understanding why they're going to get benefit from it. So take Macron, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Macron campaign. His team knocked on 250,000 doors. They had a 15-minute conversation with every one of those voters. And they talked about people's views on the future of France, their community, their family, how they felt. They fed that all into an app, and it got sent up the machine to sort of data analysis, and the voter on the doorstep knew that someone, somewhere, was listening to what they had to say. If you compare that experience to the traditional door-knocking experience, which generally consists of knock knock, who are you going to vote for? Thank you, goodbye. You can totally tell the difference in experience that people are having. Now, the organisation that I run, More United, is trying in some areas to bring together politicians and people from across different parties and none to campaign on issues that they agree on, rather than using campaigning through the traditional party prism. And we're doing this because we've identified a gap. Politicians have direct power, but they have very little resource to get it done. They have little time, little money, few staff. People, on the other hand, have basically no access to direct power, but collectively they have a chance to create a lot of resource, raise a lot of money, use a lot of volunteer time. So you put that together, politicians with power, no resource, people with power, without power, but resource, and that's a market. And we're using tech to foster and develop that market, to create a place that combines the direct power of people in Parliament with collective power of a mass movement outside it. And our ambition is that no matter where you live, no matter who your MP is, no matter what party you normally support, if you care about a particular issue, you can go online, you can find a politician, might be in a different part of the country, might not even be your own country, but you can find a politician who is working to deliver that issue, and then you can do something to help them achieve it. It'll be on your terms, it'll be easy, and your voice will be heard, and you'll know that the actions that you take are going to have impact. Now, we're not going to solve these problems overnight, and it's not going to be for everyone. It certainly requires us to think radically different about politics and political campaigning and the entire structure of the party system. But I do believe it's possible, and more importantly, I believe it's necessary to tackle the polarisation that has become so prevalent in our democracies. And I am hopeful that one evening, on a Sunday, while I'm waiting for my takeaway, I can log on, do my little bit of politics, and I know that because of technology, I have a genuine route to real and impactful political power.